The repercussions from the murder of Charlie Kirk continue to be felt, perhaps most notably with the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and of the press. President Trump said newscasters with overwhelmingly negative coverage of him should lose their licenses. FCC Chairman Brendan Carr is threatening broadcasters over content he says violates the public interest. Trump also issued an executive order declaring Antifa to be a domestic terrorist organization, while his Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, vowed to uproot and dismantle liberal groups. So, Michael, is this a sort of new McCarthyism period, or is that overstating it?
Well, you have me waxing a bit nostalgic in the sense that I received a classical liberal arts education at Indiana University in Bloomington. I studied with people like the great oral historian John Barton out of the history department. Murray Sperber, Rick may know his book, Beer and Circus, where he was ran out of town for critiquing Bobby Knight. So I come out of that tradition. We talked about the Hollywood 10, the House Un-American Activities Committee. We talked about the junior senator, Joseph McCarthy, who tried to make a name for himself as a Democrat by saying things. So there's nothing new here to some degree, right, about the motives of the agenda. I think about Barry Goldwater, his psychology. When in the early 60s, he said, extremism, the defense of liberty is no vice, and moderation, the pursuit of justice is no virtue. So that sort of rhetoric set the tone and tenor for those who are against the civil rights movement. I think about the Southern strategy, the GOP's electoral strategy to increase political support among Southern white voters by appealing to the racialized instincts of certain people in the South against Black American interests. I think about the Nixon administration's enemies list. I think about the Reagan Revolution and its coded language about welfare queens. And lastly, let's please not forget Newt Gingrich and the 104th and 105th Congress and his contract with America, which is actually a contract on America. We need to champion the use of these hyperbolic, over-the-top invective language, which became normative. So there's this long history of this sort of anti-egalitarian discourse, except now it's being weaponized in plain view by things like the FCC, the DOJ, and the FBI, which is problematic for a fully functioning democracy in my view.
Jenny?
Speak on, brother. Yeah, seriously. I mean, I am really, really concerned about the state of our democracy right now. I think we are in a new McCarthyism, specifically the language, right? So when you have the President of the United States, his Vice President, the Attorney General, all basically declaring that people who oppose the administration and its policies are enemies of the government, that is really dangerous. Okay,
but if I understand your point, Michael, you're saying this has been going on, this is nothing new, and you're saying, so why is it worse now? I'm asking, so why is it worse now?
I think there's a couple dimensions. One is the intensity of the language, the level of dehumanization of language we see. I mean, going back to the campaign and the declaration that immigrants are eating dogs and eating cats is a dehumanizing rhetoric. And it is pervasive across the leadership right now, which I think is a bit different.
When I think of McCarthyism, though, I think about an obsession with an ideology. And I think, as we've said on the show before, I don't know an ideology behind Trumpism. What I see is someone, there's a line from Badlands by Bruce Springsteen. Poor man wants to be rich, rich man wants to be king, and a king ain't satisfied till he rules everything. And except for that first part about being poor, this fits Trump to a T. He wants to rule everything. This is a page out of the authoritarian playbook. And so I think that's very dangerous. And the people who can be the checks and balances, whether it be Congress or the courts, have shown an inability and unwillingness to take him on.
I want to go back to the nothing new here point. And I apologize for pivoting this to academia, but if you go back to the Biden era, conservatives were right to criticize academia's crackdown on academic freedom and freedom of speech, to argue that universities had ceased being centers of idea exchange and had instead become left-wing echo chambers. The median voter was on board with that narrative. But the Trump administration's response has been reprehensible. It's basically been an equal and opposite tack on critics of the right, and that starts with deporting student protesters, and then, of course, with all the Kimmel stuff that's in the news right now. And so it's super frustrating to me that for this brief period, conservatives had the upper moral hand, and now Trump has blown it.
And a difference here, though, also is that this is the state now cracking down, right? I mean, an institution, if Colgate University wanted to
It is, and let me say, I do think it's refreshing to see that some people on the right are fighting back against this. Loud voices like Ted Cruz calling Carr's threats dangerous as hell, Megyn Kelly calling Bondi's comments absolutely ridiculous, Tucker Carlson pointing out that Charlie Kirk wouldn't have wanted this at all. So there is some refreshing pushback from the right.
Michael?
But there's always been a paucity of data on the so-called left-wing takeover of American classrooms. There's always been a paucity of data there, right? Always.
Now, you mentioned the Kimmel thing, and that's been reversed, right? So what's behind that? I mean, is ABC showing spine, or is this a matter of worrying about their bottom line?
Stock price dropped.
The stock price dropped? Well, I think you said last week you were going to sell yours.
I did
so.
sell.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I think there had been some organizations that had been more active at organizing protests against these activities, but they're currently under investigation or being threatened. So Media Matters, for example, is an organization that has pushed in the past against these kinds of initiatives, but Media Matters has been very quiet to organize a specific boycott against ABC and Disney.
Well,
And don't forget, 6.4 million viewers as opposed to 1.5 on an average night. So a lot of eyeballs, certainly made its way to ABC, even with about 20% of their affiliates not carrying it. So this may not be a bad business decision either.
no, go ahead.
Sorry, just on that point though, what's really amazing to me is because we have so much conglomerate ownership of broadcast stations, our media market wasn't able to watch Kimmel because Nexstar is conservative owned and they continue to choose to boycott.
Right, so Nexstar and Sinclair, which is also a pretty conservative station group, has still not put them on.
And really fast, for those of you interested in the subject, don't forget, we're talking about David Halbersam's work, the 50s. He does a great job of it. Tom Brokaw wrote a book called The Greatest Generation, speaks to a lot of the things we were talking about a long time ago.
So I did want to ask, and you were saying Media Matters has been quiet. So have we seen really a chilling effect on speech? Because that seems to be a concern.
Oh,
Chad?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, this kind of goes back to the George Stephanopoulos censorship, these threats to sue the media if they get their facts slightly off, wrong. I don't know. I mean, yes, it's clear that these are companies with multiple interests that are worried about their bottom line, and they are caving to some pressures.
What worries me is that I'm concerned when I look at social media and what's happening. I mean, I know I myself am much more conscientious about what I'm saying right now. And I worry that you have more moderate voices that are choosing to be quiet right now because there's so much animosity. And when you don't have moderate voices chiming into these discussions, then all that's left are the extremes.
And really fast, we go back to January 20th. The President of the United States said in his first speech for 2 minutes and 12 seconds, there will be no censorship in this country. He said it. First day in office, 2 minutes, 12 seconds. So the hypocrisy is frightening.
Now, the vice president, after the Kirk murder, said that people who he said were celebrating what had happened, that they should lose their jobs, and that trying to get people to look for people who were on social media, and
It's
people
cancel
post all sorts of
culture
things.
from the right. I mean, they complained so much, and as
Yeah.
Chad said, with some justification when this was happening, when the left was going through it, and now that they're in the position they're in now, they have no problem.
That
going
part of
through
it bothers my conscience a little bit less. Like, if it's a legitimate, let's celebrate the death of another human being and you lose your job over it,
Right.
I'm okay with that. But they're using it as pretense for all the other stuff.
Yes.
Like, Jimmy Kimmel didn't say anything negative
Right.
about Charlie Kirk.
Well, and there's a difference
Yes.
between private individuals basically putting up a mirror and saying we have systemic sexism in society, and thinking about the Me Too movement, for example, right? That's private people basically saying there's a problem here. We currently have government who is actively persecuting people because of
And
messages.
Trump says
they
if
don't like.
you criticize me, you lose your license. I mean, that's how can you
Well,
get
he said
more obvious than that?
He said, if he was using an example of the evening newscast, and he said they're 97% against me. So I mean, he's not quite saying any criticism there.
Well,
he's
no,
saying
if you go and
overwhelmingly.
look at a couple of his lines, it seems pretty
He's also
clear.
using an equal time argument, which is not an argument that's been in place.
Since 1980s.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
The media landscape.
There's also, with all of this and what Brendan Carr, the FCC commissioner, is doing, there is a public interest standard, is what he's falling back on there. That because it's broadcasting and it uses the spectrum, there is, you're supposed to broadcast in the public interest. Now, how that's defined, of course.
This moment makes McCarthyism looks like child's play.
Okay, we're going to leave that right there.